AITA for refusing to share my food with my roommate. She ate all my food and complained that I needed to cook better. I decided to teach her a lesson. I 26 female have been living with my roommate 25 female for about a year now, and for the most part, things have been fine. We aren't best friends, but we coexist well enough, at least, we did until last night. I had a long day at work. The kind of long day where you feel like every ounce of energy has been sucked out of you, and the only thing keeping you going is the promise of food when you get home. I was exhausted, drained, and just wanting something simple and satisfying to eat. I stopped by the store on my way home and grabbed a rotisserie chicken. Nothing fancy, nothing extravagant, just a chicken. I figured it would be perfect. I could eat some that night, then cut up the rest for sandwiches and quick meals over the next couple of days. It was the kind of small joy that makes life easier, you know. When I got home, I ate a bit of it, enough to satisfy my hunger without going overboard, then carefully packed it up and put it in the fridge. Just to make sure there was no confusion, I even stuck a note on it with my name, just a simple way to indicate that it was mine. We've never had a formal agreement about food, but we generally stick to the rule of, if you didn't buy it, don't eat it. I went to bed that night without a second thought, already looking forward to the next day when I'd have something delicious and easy to take to work. But when I woke up this morning and went to the fridge, the container was gone. Not moved. Not shifted. Just completely, utterly gone. I stood there for a second, thinking maybe I had put it somewhere else. Maybe I was half asleep and just not seeing it. But no. I checked every shelf, every drawer, even the freezer in case I had absent-mindedly tossed it in there. Nothing. At this point, I already knew what had happened, but I still felt that sinking feeling of disbelief. I grabbed my phone and texted my roommate, asking if she had seen the chicken. Not accusing, just asking. Maybe, just maybe, there was some kind of explanation that didn't involve her eating an entire rotisserie chicken overnight. Her response came in quickly, and it was nasty. Instead of a simple, "Oh, yeah, I ate it, sorry," she snapped back at me. She didn't deny taking it. Instead, she got defensive. She told me I didn't need to eat that much chicken, that I was overreacting, that it wasn't a big deal. I had to reread the message because I couldn't believe what I was seeing. I didn't need to eat that much chicken. What? Since when does someone else get to dictate how much of my own food I eat? And even if I had planned to eat the whole thing in one sitting, so what? It was mine. I bought it. I labeled it. It wasn't hers to touch, let alone completely devour in a single night. I was fuming, but I kept my response short and to the point. I told her that anything in the fridge that she didn't buy was off limits, period. No exceptions, no excuses. She didn't reply after that, but I know she saw the message. And honestly, I hate that I even had to send it. I don't like feeling petty. I don't like having to enforce what should be basic respect. But at the same time, I also don't like having my food stolen and then being shamed for daring to be upset about it. I went to work hungry today. I had nothing else prepped because I was counting on that chicken. I had to buy lunch, which wasn't in my budget for the week, and now I'm just sitting here wondering how someone could be so entitled and rude about something so simple. So, am I the asshole for drawing a hard line on this? Because right now, I feel like I shouldn't have had to in the first place. Update 1. After my roommate devoured my entire rotisserie chicken and then had the audacity to lecture me on how much I should or shouldn't be eating, I realized something: words alone weren't going to solve this problem. A normal, reasonable person would have apologized. A normal, reasonable person would have felt a twinge of guilt, maybe even embarrassment, at being called out for stealing an entire meal from someone else. A normal, reasonable person would have at least attempted to replace what they took, or at the very least, acknowledged that they were in the wrong. But she wasn't a normal, reasonable person. She was entitled, dismissive, and completely unbothered by the fact that she had left me without a meal, without a second thought, and then had the nerve to act like I was the one overreacting. It wasn't just about the chicken anymore. It was about the complete lack of respect. The way she seemed to think my things were fair game just because they existed in the same space as her. The way she didn't even try to hide it, didn't attempt to justify it beyond insulting me. She didn't care. And that was what made my frustration morph into something sharper, something colder. So, I decided to act strategically. I knew that a simple, "Hey, don't eat my food," wasn't going to cut it. She had already proven that she didn't care about words. Logic didn't work on people who refused to acknowledge it. Common courtesy meant nothing to someone who had never been held accountable for their actions. What I needed was a consequence. A way to make her feel the weight of her own selfishness in a way she couldn't ignore. And what better way to do that than to turn her own behavior against her? The plan was brilliantly simple. I went to the store and deliberately sought out the cheapest, most offensive excuse for cheese that I could find. The kind that barely qualified as food. The kind that smelled faintly of burnt plastic and had the texture of old rubber. The kind that, when you touched it, left a greasy residue on your fingers, like it was made of some kind of synthetic material rather than anything resembling actual dairy. This was the kind of cheese that should have been illegal to sell as an edible product. But it was perfect for what I needed. Then, I boiled a batch of plain pasta. No salt. No oil. No seasoning of any kind. Just water and noodles, left to cook until they were so soft they lost all structural integrity, transforming into a sticky, gelatinous mush. It looked like something served in a poorly funded school cafeteria. Maybe worse. And to top it all off, I mixed in the cheese, or at least, I attempted to. But the so-called cheese didn't even melt. It just sat there in the pot, stubbornly refusing to blend, instead breaking into sad little clumps that clung to the pasta like they, too, were suffering through the experience. The result was a monstrosity. A dish that no sane person would ever willingly consume. It had no flavor, no texture, no redeeming qualities whatsoever. It wasn't just bad food, it was an insult to the very concept of cooking. It was, by all definitions, a punishment disguised as a meal. I scooped the abomination into a container, sealed it shut, and labeled it with big, clear writing, "My dinner." A statement. A declaration. A trap. Then, I placed it in the fridge in its usual spot, right where my actual food should have been. And then, I waited. The next morning, I opened the fridge, and sure enough, the container was empty. Not half-eaten. Not tampered with. Completely empty. She had eaten every last bite of the gluey, flavorless disgrace that I had so carefully crafted. The realization hit me in slow waves of satisfaction. She actually ate it. She saw the container, saw my name on it, and despite everything, despite knowing she didn't buy it, despite the label making it clear it wasn't hers, she still took it. And she ate all of it. Every last bite. I turned to look at her, and there she was, standing by the counter, sipping her coffee, her expression unusually tight. She looked irritated, but not in a way that suggested she had figured anything out. Not yet. Feigning casual curiosity, I tilted my head slightly. "How was my dinner?" She grimaced, barely hiding her disgust. "Honestly? It was just awful. You can't cook." I let the words hang in the air for a moment before responding, my voice light, almost amused. "Oh, really? I guess I just don't try because I only cook for myself." She snorted and turned away, brushing off the comment, but I saw the slight twitch in her jaw, the way her fingers tightened around her coffee mug. For the first time in a long time, she looked like she was thinking. Like she was considering the implications of what had just happened. I didn't say anything else. I didn't need to. The trap had been set, the lesson had been delivered, and now it was up to her whether or not she would take the hint. But did she learn a lesson from this? Update 2. It would seem that after the first gastronomic trap, my roommate would have taken a moment to reflect on her behavior. After all, she had endured an entire meal of choking down the most offensively bland, gluey, flavorless pasta mixed with what could only be described as industrial-grade, plastic-like cheese. A meal so void of pleasure, so fundamentally wrong in every culinary sense, that any rational person would have walked away from the experience with a newfound appreciation for respecting other people's food. If there was ever a moment to reconsider her food-stealing tendencies, that would have been it. But no. A few days later, I opened the refrigerator and immediately noticed something was off. It was that instinctive, stomach-dropping feeling you get when you just know something has been tampered with before you even fully process it. My eyes scanned the shelves, moving past the usual assortment of condiments and leftovers, and then landed on the spot where my almond milk should have been. Empty. The entire container, gone. Not pushed to the back, not misplaced, not left half full like a normal person who might have just borrowed a splash. Completely gone. As if it had never existed. And that was when I knew, the lesson had not been learned. At first, I just stood there, staring at the vacant space where my almond milk had once been, letting the sheer audacity of it all wash over me. The worst part? I had bought that container just the day before. It wasn't like it had been sitting there, forgotten, tempting fate. It was fresh, newly opened, meant to last me through the week for my coffee and smoothies. And yet, despite everything, despite her previous experience of food theft backfiring so spectacularly, she had done it again. Now, I should clarify something. This wasn't just any almond milk. I always buy the unsweetened kind. Not just the kind labeled as, no sugar added, but the truly unpalatable, borderline punishing variety. The type that has an unmistakable, slightly bitter, almost soapy aftertaste. The type that no one in their right mind would ever drink for pleasure. It worked perfectly for baking or blended into a smoothie, where other ingredients masked its aggressive lack of sweetness. But in coffee? Absolutely vile. It clashed so violently with coffee's natural bitterness that even a single sip would coat your mouth in an aftertaste so unpleasant, it lingered like a bad decision. So, knowing my dear roommate's habit of helping herself to things that didn't belong to her, I could already picture exactly what had happened. She had woken up, groggy and unbothered by her past transgressions, strolled into the kitchen, and gone to the fridge without a second thought. She had reached for my almond milk, as if it were her own, as if it had materialized in that fridge for her convenience. She had poured a generous amount into her precious morning coffee, fully expecting the smooth, creamy taste of regular dairy milk. She had probably even hummed to herself as she stirred it in, completely unaware that she was about to ruin her own morning. And that was where the best part of all this began. As I moved around the apartment, I heard her in the kitchen, moving with the kind of force that suggested she was already annoyed. She had a habit of slamming cabinets and drawers around, as if their existence personally offended her, and today was no exception. Clatter. Bang. Spoon scraping against ceramic. A disgruntled huff. Then, silence. A long, heavy silence. The kind of silence that spoke volumes. Curious, I strolled into the kitchen, keeping my expression neutral, and there she was. Standing by the counter, gripping her coffee cup, staring into it like it had personally betrayed her. Her face twisted into something between revulsion and pure offense, her lips pursed as if she was physically restraining herself from gagging. She wasn't drinking it anymore, she was glaring at it. And then her gaze snapped to me, sharp and accusing, like this was somehow my fault. She looked at me, eyes narrowing, and practically snarled, demanding to know what kind of disgusting thing this was because she had assumed I was buying normal milk. I had to bite my lip to keep from laughing. Normal milk? Why on earth would I be buying normal milk when I never drank regular milk? And more importantly, why would she assume that my food choices should align with her expectations when she wasn't even the one purchasing them? Taking a slow, deliberate sip of my own coffee, the one made exactly how I liked it, with my usual almond milk, I shrugged, feigning mild confusion, as if her disgust was entirely her own problem. If she didn't like something, she was always welcome to buy her own. That was the simple, obvious solution. One that any rational person would come to without needing to be told. But, as usual, rationality was not her strong suit. She scoffed, still grimacing as she set her coffee down with an exaggerated motion, as if the cup itself had somehow wronged her. She muttered something under her breath, her tone dripping with irritation, something about how it would be more logical for me to just buy regular milk, since we share the food. I almost choked on my coffee. Share? Since when? Since when did we share food? Because, as far as I could tell, sharing implied a mutual agreement. A conversation. A discussion where both parties consented to such an arrangement. A basic, respectful understanding that both people had equal stake in the groceries purchased. But as far as I was concerned, I had never signed up for any of that. There had never been a moment where I agreed to fund her diet or act as her personal grocery sponsor. Never had I once told her, hey, feel free to help yourself to anything in the fridge, no need to ask. If anything, I had made the opposite explicitly clear. Yet, there she stood, completely serious, looking at me as if I was the one being difficult. As if I was the one breaking some unspoken rule. My patience, which had already been worn thin, was now at its absolute breaking point. Because at this moment, it became glaringly obvious that she genuinely believed she was entitled to my food. That she wasn't just sneaking things out of laziness, or occasional desperation, no, she had convinced herself that my groceries were, by default, hers to take. She really believed that I was obligated to provide her with food, without even asking me. Update 3. After everything that had happened, the stolen rotisserie chicken, the pasta trap, the almond milk debacle, I finally came to a decision: enough. If she didn't take the hints, if she refused to grasp basic human decency, if she continued to operate under the delusion that my groceries were some kind of communal resource, then I would have to teach her a lesson she would never forget. This time, I would make sure the consequences of her food theft were seared, literally, into her memory. I went out and bought a chicken. A beautiful, fresh whole chicken, just like the one she had stolen before. A chicken that, to the untrained, looked like an inviting, home-cooked meal. But this time, I was prepared. This time, it was a weapon. The preparation process was meticulous. I didn't just coat it with spice, I engineered it for maximum suffering. I started by rubbing it generously with the hottest peppers I could find. Ghost pepper powder, Carolina Reaper flakes, anything that would deliver instant, searing regret. Then, I went a step further. I added capsaicin extract, pure capsaicin, the chemical responsible for the burn in chili peppers. This wasn't just a spicy dish, this was something so potent that it came with warning labels. The kind of product that advises you to wear gloves while handling it. The kind that restaurants use in their waiver-required challenge wings. The kind that doesn't just burn your mouth, it lingers, building over time, refusing to be tamed. And I wasn't done. To ensure the heat was evenly distributed, I mixed in a special hot sauce that I had specifically sought out for this occasion. The label was dramatic: do not touch without gloves. The kind of sauce that didn't just tingle but could cause actual chemical burns if handled carelessly. I wasn't careless. I wore gloves. As I coated the chicken in this hellish mixture, I could practically feel the spice in the air. My nose burned just from standing over it. My eyes watered despite keeping a safe distance. And yet, once it was finished baking, it looked absolutely perfect. Golden brown, crispy, juicy, entirely normal on the outside. The scent of roasted garlic and herbs filled the kitchen, deceptively inviting. If you didn't know any better, you'd think it was the most delicious, home-cooked meal imaginable. Just the kind of dish my roommate would never be able to resist. I placed it in the fridge. No labels. No notes. I wanted it to seem like an unguarded prize, like an unspoken offering just waiting to be stolen. Then, I went to bed, calm, patient, knowing that by morning, justice would be served. What woke me up was the sound of chaos. A violent clatter in the kitchen, followed by the unmistakable sound of cabinet doors slamming open and shut in rapid succession. Then, a choked, strangled sound, half a scream, half a gasp. A desperate rustling of plastic. The sound of water being guzzled, then spit out. Footsteps stomping frantically across the floor. I got up, stretched lazily, and walked out of my room just in time to witness the disaster unfold. There she was, a complete wreck. Her face was red, blotchy, sweat beading at her forehead as she frantically ran between the sink and the fridge. Her mouth hung open, tongue sticking out slightly, panting like she had just run a marathon through the pits of hell. Her hands were shaking as she fumbled for the milk, desperate, gulping straight from the carton. Except, it didn't help. Because the milk she had grabbed, it wasn't regular milk. It was the same unsweetened almond milk she had stolen before. The kind that didn't coat your mouth, didn't provide any relief, didn't do anything to stop the raging inferno I had inflicted upon her. I watched, leaning casually against the counter, calm, composed, sipping my tea as if nothing was happening. She turned to me, eyes wild, furious, her expression shifting between rage and sheer panic. She was gasping for breath, waving a hand in front of her face like that would somehow help, barely able to form a coherent sentence through the burning. "What did you do?" she choked out, her voice hoarse, her tongue clearly on fire. I took another sip of my tea, entirely unbothered. I'm not cooking for two anymore. I guess you didn't get it, so I had to explain it in practice. She gaped at me, realization finally hitting. For the first time, true horror flickered across her face. Not just at the physical pain she was experiencing, but at the unshakable truth behind my words. Because she knew. She knew she had done this to herself. She knew that the only reason she was suffering right now was because she had once again stolen food that wasn't hers. She stood there, panting, sweat gathering at her hairline, blinking rapidly as if she was trying to process just how badly she had miscalculated. Then, without another word, she turned and stormed off, still fanning her mouth, still suffering. And from that moment on, she never touched my food again. She hasn't so much as glanced at my side of the fridge since then. She finally learned. Update 4. After the fiery catastrophe of the stolen chicken, my roommate finally learned her lesson. It was as if the universe had reset itself. The fridge was suddenly safe again. My leftovers remained untouched, my groceries undisturbed. It was a new era of peace. A well-earned victory. For the first time since we had moved in together, I could go to sleep knowing that when I woke up, my food would still be there. I could buy something nice for myself without feeling like I had to defend it. I could open the fridge without holding my breath, bracing for the inevitable disappointment of finding something missing. It was glorious. But that was not even the best part. The best part was watching her struggle. Before, she had never needed to cook. Why would she? She had me as an unknowing, unwilling provider. She had never once had to figure out her own meals because every time hunger struck, she could just take what was mine. She had depended on my groceries, my effort, my meal prep. And now, with that door permanently slammed shut, she had to fend for herself. And it was a disaster. It started with the simplest of tasks, boiling pasta. The very bare minimum of cooking skills. And yet, she failed spectacularly. I watched as she hovered over the pot, impatient, confused as to why the water was taking so long to boil. She kept poking at the dry noodles before the water was even hot, growing frustrated as if expecting some kind of shortcut. Eventually, she dumped the pasta in before the water even reached a simmer, watching in horrified fascination as the noodles turned to a mushy, starchy glue. She drained it in the sink, scowling, muttering under her breath, angry at the pasta itself, as if it had personally wronged her. I sipped my tea and enjoyed the show. Then came her attempt at eggs. A tragedy. First, she turned the heat up too high, then cracked the eggs directly into the smoking hot pan with no oil, no butter, no sense of caution. The eggs welded themselves to the surface in an instant, burning into an unyielding crust of disappointment. She tried to scrape them free, but all she managed to do was tear them into shredded, rubbery fragments, half raw in some places and burnt to a crisp in others. It was a sight to behold. She dumped the whole mess in the trash and tried again. This time, she drowned the pan in oil, too much oil, so much oil that when she dropped the eggs in, they practically floated. She frowned at them, poking them with a spatula, as if expecting them to obey her will. Instead, they splattered, sending tiny burning hot droplets of oil onto her arm. She yelped, jumped back, and watched in horror as the eggs continued cooking aggressively, edges curling upward, turning crispy and brittle before she even had a chance to intervene. I nearly laughed out loud. Then came her doomed attempt at grilled cheese. A simple concept. Bread, cheese, heat. Yet, somehow, she miscalculated every step. She turned the stove on too high again, slapped dry bread onto the pan without butter, and shoved slices of cold cheese in between, expecting it to melt on command. It did not. What did happen was the bottom of the bread scorching to a blackened crisp while the cheese inside remained cold and solid. She flipped it over with too much force, sending a piece of half-burnt bread skidding across the stovetop. She scowled, tried again, and burned the other side just as thoroughly. When she finally took a bite, she chewed for all of 2 seconds before spitting it back out. I sat at the table, enjoying my own perfectly made meal, letting the satisfaction settle deep in my bones. Then came her attempt at rice. A classic beginner mistake. She poured too much water into the pot, completely ignored the instructions, and let it boil into a starchy soup. When she lifted the lid, the steam billowed up in her face, making her yelp and recoil. She poked at the bloated, overcooked grains with the spoon, disgusted, frustrated, defeated. She dumped the whole pot into the sink and swore loudly. The days went on, and her failures continued. Every single meal she attempted ended in disaster. She burnt toast. She overseasoned instant ramen to the point of inedibility. She tried to bake frozen chicken without realizing it needed to be defrosted first, resulting in a half-raw, half-burnt mess. Every time she failed, she got angrier, more desperate, slamming pots and pans around the kitchen as if she could intimidate the food into cooperating. And through it all, I sat back, calm, content, well-fed, watching her slowly unravel. The hunger was getting to her. She was used to effortless meals, used to the luxury of stolen convenience. Now, every time she walked into the kitchen, she walked into a battlefield. Her stomach growled, but her own incompetence stood in the way. She never tried to take my food again. She never so much as glanced at my side of the fridge. Because she finally understood what she had lost. Not just access to my groceries, not just the ability to freeload off my effort, but the security of knowing there would always be something for her to take. Now, she had only herself to rely on. And she was failing spectacularly. I ate well. I slept peacefully. I watched how she learned to cook, and yet she was still slowly getting the hang of it. And in the end, she finally learned.